Hello, a good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. I am, of course, Bastani. Tonight I'm joined, I must say, to my great, immense pleasure, by Marcus Barnett. Marcus, how are we?
Hello, Aaron. How are you doing, mate? You're right.
Very well. And Marcus is a fabulous guy, good friend. You wear a lot of hats, Marcus. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? What do you do? Who do you work for?
So I'm the associate editor of Tribune magazine.
That's enough. That'll do. Coming up tonight, Israel's endgame for its genocide in Gaza. The Office for Budget Responsibility's Fiscal Risks and Sustainability Report is something you should be aware of, and it's not good. Tucker Carlson's interview with the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian. And where have the Epstein files gone to now? Apparently, they don't exist anymore. Stay tuned for all of that and more. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you can, of course, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. Help us build a new media for different politics. And let me know what you think on tonight's show. You can use the comments here on YouTube, use the YouTube chat, or just tweet at us, at me, using the hashtag Novara Live. Israel's endgame for its genocidal campaign against the people of Gaza is now out in the open. After 21 months of war crimes, indiscriminate bombing, and genocidal statements from Israeli politicians, Defense Minister Israel Katz just said the quiet part out loud. Katz told reporters yesterday that he has instructed the IDF and the Defense Ministry to bring forward a plan to create a so-called humanitarian city on the rubble of Rafah in southern Gaza. Here's how the BBC reported on Katz's plan.
This plan to essentially move 600,000 people initially, and then the full population of 2 million people to what he's described as a camp on the ruins of Rafah in the south of Gaza. He's talked about screening people to get in, to check that they aren't Hamas operatives, and to encourage then emigration. Otherwise, people wouldn't be allowed out into other areas of Gaza. Now, this has been strongly condemned by international lawyers who say that this is essentially pushing people into a confined space like this.
Quite extraordinary. We're talking about 600,000 people crammed into an area of 64 square kilometres, which is about half the size of Disney World. The Isle of Wight, I think, is about 340 square kilometres. And then eventually, the entire remaining population of Gaza, estimated to be at about 2 million people, altogether we're looking at about 2.5 million people, will be brought into the zone. Half the size of Disneyland. Remember that before the genocide, Gaza was called the world's largest open-air prison by the UN, and that was due to Israel's illegal blockade of the Strip imposed in 2007. Now, while Israeli negotiators and Hamas are holding indirect ceasefire talks in Qatar, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, well, he's currently in Washington, D.C. And Netanyahu's visit to the US to see President Donald Trump is his third since Trump's re-election. The two leaders used the opportunity to discuss the US plan for Gaza, which involves America taking control of post-war Gaza and permanently resettling its population elsewhere. At a White House meeting yesterday, Netanyahu said this: "I think President Trump has a brilliant vision. It's called free choice. If people want to stay, they can stay. But if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. We're working with the United States very closely about finding countries that will seek to realize what they always say, that they want to give the Palestinians a better future." Who will help us ethnically cleanse Gaza and give the people of Gaza a better future? Let's be clear. Both the plan touted by Israel Katz of confining hundreds of thousands of people into a camp, half the size of Disneyland, and not allowing them out unless they wish to leave Gaza then, and Trump's plan of resettling Gaza's population into surrounding states, amount to crimes under the Geneva Convention. All across Europe, you've got leaders on the right saying we don't want refugees, we don't want people leaving West Asia to come to our countries. The Israelis are saying, no, guys, you missed the memo. That's the plan. And guess what? You need to give us political support at the same time. And guess what they do? Like I say, time after time, the European right don't like refugees, but they love making more of them. The US and Israel are planning the arbitrary and permanent forcible transfer of the population of Gaza, which, to be clear, is a crime against humanity under the 1998 Rome Statute, which set up the International Criminal Court. And neither Israel nor the US are signatories to the Rome Statute, but Palestine is. The illegality of their plans for Gaza didn't stop this already viral moment from taking place last night.
So I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Netanyahu knows that flattery will get you absolutely everywhere with Donald Trump, as this clip from the White House dinner seems to suggest.
You have the greatest man in the world to answer that age-old question, two-state. Go ahead, you give him your honest answer.
I think Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And that means that certain powers, like overall security, will always remain in our hands. Now, that is a fact, and no one in Israel will agree to anything else because we don't commit suicide. We want life, we cherish life for ourselves, for our neighbors, and I think we can work out a peace between us and the entire Middle East with President Trump's leadership, and by working together, I think we can establish a very, very broad peace that will include all our neighbors.
A broad peace, and if you don't like the peace, you either have to die, be incarcerated essentially, or leave. What kind of a peace is that? Well, while Trump and Netanyahu were busy praising one another, Israel was using US defense dollars to do this. What a juxtaposition of images. Two affluent older men around a table praising one another. Here is my nomination for you to win the Nobel Peace Prize. By the way, I don't think that means the slightest thing. Oh, that's very, very meaningful from you. Thank you so much. And their nice $1,000 suits, their hands immaculate. And at the same time, flames, death, decay, murder, genocide. Do you think Trump's going to win the Peace Prize? Certainly interesting. Certainly interesting if Bibi Netanyahu has any influence over the decision. I suspect he doesn't. At least 78 Palestinians, including people trying to access aid, have been killed and over 260 wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza in the past 24 hours. 24 hours, not week, not month, in the last day. The death toll has continued to climb throughout today in particular. Israel conducted missile strikes on makeshift tents and a school, sheltering displaced Palestinians in central Gaza's Barrage refugee camp. A witness told Al Jazeera this. The attack felt like a ring of fire. These are school children. What is it about this school? There's nothing in it except children. It shelters only kids who have nowhere else to go. These drones are targeting nylon tents where people are trying to sleep. I honestly don't know why. Well, we know why. It's a genocide. We know why. It's like the precision attacks by the IDF in Tehran, and we see parked cars go into the sky like they're balloons. But we're told in this country by IDF spokespeople and the Israeli government that these are precision targets. These are precision targets too. There's no accident, by the way. Attacks with the intention of sowing terror amongst civilian populations is, guess what? Terrorism. We have a word for it. Now, this morning, the Israeli Army's Arabic language spokesperson, Avishai Andrei, issued the latest of forced evacuation orders for civilians in 9 areas of Khan Yunis, that's in southern Gaza. You can see there that Andrei confirms the IDF is, quote, expanding its operations and, quote, intensifying sudden and concentrated firepower. So sudden it's going to kill kids. We know that so-called safe zones are frequently attacked by the IDF and that the constant displacement of desperate and terrified civilians serves to further deplete and destabilize families who've already lost everything. Today, 5 Israeli soldiers were killed and 14 wounded in Beit Hanun, and that's in northern Gaza, with some news outlets reporting that the Qassam brigades have taken responsibility. 887 IDF soldiers have been killed in the past 21 months, while conservative estimates place the death toll of Palestinians in Gaza at approximately 57,000 people, although, of course, other estimates suggest it exceeds 100,000 people. Marcus, what do you make of what the US and Israel are proposing for Gaza going forward?
Well, even despite every atrocity we've seen on our phones in the past 2 years, this is an exceptionally sickening plan, isn't it? I mean, like from the get-go, the plan has only been to kill and maim, kill and maim, kill and maim, and then come up with perverse suggestions of solutions such as this that preclude that killing is the only answer to what has happened, you know? And I think that despite Trump's attitudes and institutional loyalties being very, very hard to predict on a daily basis, I think it's pretty illuminating that despite whatever he said of him in the past, you know, he's gone on record as saying all sorts of things about Netanyahu. Trump clearly sees a bit of himself in him, doesn't he? I mean, in both of their rhetoric, you know, style and plans, there is this blatant racism. There's a sense that Palestinians should have no control over themselves or their destinies. They should have no self-determination. That's a question that must be ruled out. And that any future which involves Palestinians that doesn't involve blood and deserve bloodshed is one where they shut up and keep quiet. But I do think there's also a wider question here too. I mean, Netanyahu himself, you know, he's a man who's thinking about his future. Until December, at least, he's maneuvered the Knesset into, you know, him having control of it still. But he is managing a society which is in free fall here. You know, he's a society which is in complete crisis. You know, it's never been more war-scarred. It's never been more damaged than it is now. There's a growing public and institutional resentment in Israel against him as a conductor of conflicts. Although it probably should be said, there's not a huge deal of resentment towards his treatment of Palestinians, if the polls are to be believed. But this is someone who sees himself as a Churchillian figure and clearly sees his historic role now as moving from some sort of compromise and defeat in the domestic arena to being registered in a historic sense in, you know, Israeli history as, you know, the figure who did the most of his generation to defeat and dissolve the Palestinian people. I think that, you know, you're always seeing some sort of discussion or divide amongst the Western elites and the ruling class of Israel about, you know, how to resolve the situation that's been, you know, happening since October the 7th. And I think that there's tensions here, and I think there's things that we can work out here as people who oppose the genocide and, you know, organizations who oppose it. I think that all of these ideas are now coming forward because there is this international pressure to just do something, you know. None of the suggestions make any sense. I mean, the leaked FT report, which seems to be the case that Tony Blair is trying to facilitate some sort of new Gaza on the wreckage of the old, which celebrates Trump and Saudi royalty. You know, all of these terrible ideas are coming forward now because the ruling classes across the world they're cracking on this question. They know that it's so volatile. It's damaging America's decline from unipolarity into some sort of managed multipolarity where it can get the best for itself. Anti-Palestinian, pro-Israeli candidates are cracking in every democratic election. The repression, you know, in this country against figures like Bob Villan and NECAP is just simply not working. The Israeli ruling class are being chased by the ICJ. I think the way that the world solidarity movement for the Palestinian people is reacting with such discipline and such confidence and impressive might means that we just have to keep on negotiating for ourselves the point that beyond all of this, you know, we're not fearful of any particular disgusting new idea. Nothing is acceptable short of an unconditional permanent ceasefire, the arrest of Netanyahu and all of those who've abetted him in Israeli civil society and the armed forces.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. You know, there was the FT reporting, not just on that story with the Tony Blair Institute, but also their liaison with the Boston Consulting Group. And, you know, the Boston Consulting Group were working on this big report with the TBI, it turned out, about, you know, turning Gaza into effectively something that looks like, you know, another emirate of the UAE. And I think you're right, that is happening. Why on earth is the Boston Consulting Group working on a proposal like that? It's because there's this incredible political vacuum, right? Israel can no longer entirely determine facts on the ground. The US can no longer keep Israel on a tight leash. There are not many world leaders of international standing that can actually try and make their mark. The Europeans obviously would have been a much louder, more independent voice 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I think that's right, Marcus. You know, when you read the FT, why on earth is the BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and the Tony Blair Institute, why are they talking about what Gaza's going to look like? This is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It's because there's been a complete failure of of international statescraft, individual politicians. And I think it really reflects this moment we're moving from unipolarity to multipolarity. Lots of countries like France, the UK, still matter, not superpowers, still matter. They don't really know where they fit in here, right? What do? Do we tell Daddy Trump that he's wrong? Maybe not. So while Israel continues to bomb women, men, and children sheltering in the ruins of schools, and the US and Israel decide whether to herd Palestinians into concentration camps or simply forcibly transfer them to other countries, this is what British ministers are busy with. Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy is due to meet Israeli Ambassador Zippy Hoteveli and was apparently advised by a policy officer to make the claim that the BBC is institutionally anti-Semitic. This is after the moral outrage over punk duo Bob Vylan leading the crowd in a chant of death, death to the IDF at Glastonbury in recent weeks, an incident that Somerset Police have launched an investigation into. Independent journalist Matt Kennard also revealed in a post on X that the meeting between Nandy and Hoteveli is scheduled for tomorrow, and that Nandy will tell Hoteveli this. And Nandy will tell the ambassador she believes the BBC is, quote, institutionally anti-Semitic, and that, quote, one mistake is an editing error, but if you have multiple mistakes, you need to look at the leadership. And Nandy will also tell Hoteveli that, quote, Glastonbury continues to host acts with vile and inflammatory views, and more investigation is needed. However, it's important to say a source in Lisa Nandy's department said that she wouldn't be branding the BBC anti-Semitic at her meeting with the ambassador. They said, quote, that all of this was just an initial draft. How convenient. Quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. You have Lisa Nandy in the last few days making overtly political attacks on the BBC, saying that people should be fired. That is not in her gift. It's meant to be editorially independent. Now you have Nandy meeting Israel's ambassador to this country, and that draft suggests the plan is to admonish, undermine, discredit a British media institution. Quite remarkable. Quite remarkable. We talked about it on Friday with my clip from GB News with Matt Goodwin. Politicians, Tory, Labour, they said, don't talk about foreign countries. Why were there so many Palestine flags at the 2019 Labour Party conference? Put this country first. Okay, what about Israel? Well, they're a good friend. They're a good ally. Interesting, isn't it? Let's go to your thoughts, your super chats. Shalindra Singh with a £5 super chat says, just at what stage will Israel's patrons have their, quote, the emperor has no clothes moment and accept its genocidal Davo tactic for what it really is? Davo, of course, is an abuse tactic, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Waluigi Mangione says, Kissinger won a Nobel Peace Prize. Nothing is shocking after that. Very true. Very, very true. Ottocon with a 4. Very true. Would this be worse? It would be more absurd, but it probably wouldn't be worse. I think Kissinger is worse, right? Ottocon with a $4.99 super chat says, has the BBC lost their ability to wield language? There is a compound word for camps human beings are concentrated into. Don't say it's a trope. Don't say that. You're talking about 2.5 million individuals in a surface area half the size of Disneyland. Tropes aren't the world we're dealing with right now. Okay, we're talking about genocide, and it's not a trope. Today, the Office for Budget Responsibility published its Fiscal Risks and Sustainability Report. Now, I know that all sounds incredibly boring, but it's very important, believe me. Because the point of that report is to examine the fundamentals of the UK economy and its fiscal security over the coming decades. Deficits, debt, costs, benefits, productivity. What can we know about the future and how solid is the footing of Britain for the decades ahead? The top line of that report is this, as reported in the Guardian newspaper. UK public finances on unsustainable path amid growing climate debt and pension costs. Tell me something I don't know. Okay, but what does unsustainable specifically mean? Because I've heard that my entire life. Well, according to Richard Hughes, who chairs the budget watchdog, government debt will rise to 270% of GDP. That's, of course, our entire national economic output over 1 year, by 2070. So what's that? 45 years away. Something to not look forward to. That is, of course, up from just under 100% today, if current policies are left unchanged. Hughes went on to say this. The UK public finances are in an unsustainable position in the long run. The UK cannot afford the array of promises that it has made to the public. In its annual assessment, the OBR points out that the UK has, quote, the 6th highest debt, the 5th highest deficit, and the 3rd highest borrowing costs among 36 advanced economies. Moreover, it has had 17 years of flat productivity growth. No bueno. It's not good. The major takeaways are both short and long term from this report. In the short term, the OBR says that average US tariffs of 20% with the rest of the world, as seems to be the plan, would shave off approximately 1% of UK GDP and all but eliminate the government's planned headroom in 5 years' time. In other words, Rachel Reeves would be in big trouble. Then there are the promises the government has made, which, according to the OBR at least, it will struggle to keep. The first is on defence spending. In its 2025 spending review, the government announced an increase in defence spending from 2.4% of GDP this year to 2.6% in 27-28. That was, of course, funded by a cut to overseas aid. More importantly, though, it promised to meet the new NATO target of spending 3.5% of GDP on core defence by 2035. It's a lot of money. According to the OBR, that will require defence spending to rise by a further 38.6 billion. Today, we spend about 60 billion on defence. So by 2035, in today's cash, it would be 100 billion. Where is that cash coming from? 60 billion, 100 billion, and apparently we're already broke. Rachel Reeves has got an autumn budget coming up. It's going to be a catastrophe for her political credibility. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have just tried to squeeze 5 billion out of people on PIP, and they failed. You couldn't get 5 billion from people on PIP, but apparently you're going to increase defence spending by 40 billion. Where does that come from, if not borrowing? Hence, government debt goes up. As the report itself puts it, quote, policy announcements, such as the recent announcements on increasing defence spending by 2035, present new downside risks to the fiscal position. Downside risks mean they'll need to borrow more. I should say that, rather than say, it's a really dumb idea to increase defence spending, I said, look, it has lots of fiscal downside risk. Maybe Keir Starmer might listen, right? He's talking in complete, technocratese, which I don't understand, but it sounds important. Maybe we should listen. It's a dumb waste of money when we don't have much to go around. It would be better to abolish child poverty and build some housing and get cheap energy. No, we need to talk about it's got downside risk from a long-term fiscal perspective. Keir's ears would prick up like my French bulldog. Then there's pensions, with the OBR taking aim at the triple lock. The cost of the state pension, which has been ratcheted up by the triple lock over recent years, has risen from 2% of GDP in the middle of the last century to 5% now, according to the OBR. And it's poised to reach 7% of GDP by 2070 if the policy remains in place. A huge stress that this was not just due to demographic changes, people getting older, falling fertility rates, but the design of the policy, which has actually cost a lot more than people expected. The OBR now claims the triple lock costs £15.5 billion a year more than what went before it. Originally in 2011, they had forecast it would be an extra £5 billion a year. The OBR getting their numbers wrong again. Marcus, I want to hear your thoughts on this. It's such a political hot potato right now. Quickly, because I'll come back to you again on this question of pensions. Should we get rid of the triple lock?
Firstly, I loved your line there about, speaking Keirese and the ability to apply this language of economic logic to these situations and seeing where you get. It reminded me a bit of Dennis Skinner and how he used to say that he would what was the phrase he'd take to Tony Blair? He would like to maximize blue sky thinking at a multidimensional, multi-level, municipal level, and then say whatever he'd want for political purposes. And he would almost flummox Tony Blair until someone would tell him that he's being wound up, That was when they were on the NEC level together. But I do agree with the arguments about, the triple lock and about, particularly like the concerns raised by, the PCS union when the triple lock came into effect in 2011. There's obviously legitimate points there about how the triple lock benefits certain workers over others and negatively hits younger workers. But I think with these solutions and these discussions about playing around with money, I never really want to trust something that suggests there's a generational scrap from government bodies that, only seem to want to squeeze all workers, no matter what age they are, even harder. I prefer the principle that every worker deserves a comfortable, decent existence after they've finished up. I can see why, for pretty much our entire lives, Aaron, we've only ever lived in times where things have gotten more and more brutal. The only carrot dangling for a lot of younger people seems to be, almost squeezing people from older generations, pointing the finger at them to explain, the obvious decline we're living under. But I tend to always think the main thing should be these things are never about generations, they're about classes. The ruling class has been battering us for a very long time on these issues. And I think it should be quite clear to any worker that any proposal by an employer, like messing around with changes to their pension scheme, it's rarely for the benefit of the worker in a society like this. And again, I know how defeated everyone feels, but I just think that when there's all that money bobbing about in society, there's all that profit getting sent out of our country, and what really is just unpaid tax, be very, very wary of, playing around with or sacrificing decent pensions for older people in the here and now. I think we still need to just have a go at, the old political causes, really. We've got to build consensus to attack the few who take so much out of us and give so little back. We need to really break the OBR. If we want to start talking about the OBR, we need to break that whole structure and its whole way of thinking. It's just a bullshitting machine, isn't it? To create this rationale for permanent austerity and decline. I think all of us in this country deserve a lot more than that. We need a lot more developmental sense from our politicians. We need a lot less of this psychic sickness that's been plaguing our country for too long, that we should only get less,
Yeah, I do agree. That's definitely something, actually, when you talk to people on the right and also the left, they say, no, we don't really need the OBR. I find it really strange that look, the worst government we've had in this country in my lifetime, easily is Osborne, Cameron and Nick Clegg. Easily it's the coalition. And they introduce things like the triple lock. And I do agree with your argument there, actually, Marcus. I think you can keep it. You certainly don't do increases to defense spending. But, if somebody said, look, we want to build socialism in this country and we want to, generate an extra 70, 80 billion pounds worth of tax per annum, and it's going to include getting rid of the triple lock, and you have a socialist politician fronting that, and, the burden falls hardest on the shoulders of the wealthiest, but that's part of an overall agenda, I'd be favourable to it. But I do agree with you, in an era of rising inequality, right-wing hegemony, market hegemony amongst the political class, it seems like a bit of a fool's errand to say, you know what, yeah, let's cut this. You could index, by the way, state pensions just to wages rather than the triple lock, which is still quite progressive. Margaret Thatcher got rid of that. And I think you save 7-8 billion a year. And now if we're using 7-8 billion a year to build social housing for pensioners, you'd solve that problem pretty damn quick, right? And you could do other stuff with the cash too. Build social housing more generally. You could scrap child poverty for about 3 billion a year. So that money can be used for pretty good stuff. But I do agree with you, Marcus. I think in isolation, with a Starmer government, for instance, probably not smart. And also, you're not going to be able to build the kind of political coalition you want more broadly. But scrapping the OBR, I think, is very sensible. The idea that these guys were there and they said, this is going to cost us 5 billion a year. And then, oopsie, we were 10 billion a year out. 10 billion a year. Not 10 billion altogether out. 10 billion a year out forever. Over 20 years, that's 200 billion. Sorry, oops. Maybe we shouldn't have this organization. And if you say that, I've said that on X, you have really, really clever, smart people saying, we need the OBR. Well, it didn't exist before 2010. How did we survive, I wonder? Over the weekend, Tucker Carlson interviewed the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. That interview was subsequently published yesterday. Early on in their conversation, Carlson asked Pezeshkian whether Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons.
The American President Donald Trump has said that the United States bombed your enrichment facilities because the government of Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that there can be no peace until Iran does give up that nuclear program. Would you be willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for peace?
It was Netanyahu since 1984 has created this false mentality that Iran seeks a nuclear bomb, and it has insinuated that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear bomb in the past, and it has put it in the minds of every U.S. president since then, and to make them believe that we would like to have a nuclear bomb. But the truth is that we have never been after developing a nuclear bomb, not in the past, not presently, or in the future, because this is wrong, and this is in contrast to the religious decree or the fatwa, which has been issued by His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that so it is religiously forbidden for us to go after a nuclear bomb. And this was always corroborated thanks to our cooperation with IAEA, because they were always there that to verify this and to substantiate that we have never wanted a nuclear bomb.
How many times you heard that, by the way, in the media? There was a fatwa by Khamenei, I think in 2003 was the last one, against the development of nuclear technology, specifically with weapons. So you've got the Israelis, you've got all kinds of people in this country, hawks in the US as well, people that want war. The Iranians are developing nuclear weapons. Well, whether they are or not, and the IEA had absolutely no evidence of them developing nuclear weapons. They were trying to become a threshold nuclear power by enriching uranium, but not to the levels needed for nuclear weapons. Similar story with Japan, for instance, threshold nuclear power. Turkey's about to try and become a threshold nuclear power, but they hadn't enriched uranium sufficiently to create nuclear weapons. How many times in that conversation, whether or not they're trying to create those weapons, have you heard from the media, well, their own head of state, the supreme leader, issued a fatwa against the moral legitimacy of nuclear weapons? How many times have you heard that? The mad mullahs. So mad. If you Google that, by the way, very few mentions of it in the English-speaking language. One of them is an article from Harvard University. It's almost like they don't want you to know quite important facts. Later, Carlson asked whether the Israelis tried to kill Pezeshkian and other members of the Iranian government.
Do you believe the Israeli government tried to assassinate you?
They did try, yes. And they acted accordingly, but they failed. And as a true believer, I believe that it is in the hands of the God Almighty to determine when a person will die or will not die.
With respect, can you tell us how you know that you were an assassination target? A week and a half ago, I don't believe I've seen that confirmed anywhere. How are you certain they tried to kill you?
Of course, it was not the U.S. that was behind my the attempt on my life. It was Israel. I was in a meeting. We were discussing the ways to move forward, but thanks to the intelligence by the spies that they had, they tried to bombard the area that we were holding that meeting. My proposal is that the U.S. administration should refrain from getting involved in a war that is not its war, that is not America's war. It is Netanyahu's war that is having its devilish machinations for the whole region. It has its own agenda. He has his own agenda, Netanyahu, I mean, inhuman agenda, and that is having forever wars that go on and on and on. And this is my proposal to the United States, not to be fooled by Netanyahu, not to be dragged into this kind of war.
He knows what he's talking about, right? He knows his audience, forever wars. Tucker Carlson goes, oh my God, forever wars? We can absolutely have nothing to do with it. Quite interesting that word would be used, that phrase would be used. Next up, Carlson asked whether the US should be afraid of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
many Americans are afraid of Iran. You say you're not afraid, but Americans are afraid of Iran. And they believe that Iran would like to strike the United States with a nuclear weapon. They see video of Iranians saying death to America, describing our country as the great Satan. What is your opinion of that? Should we be afraid of Iran?
I believe that this is a very wrong impression that anybody might have of Iran or the Iranians. I would like to remind you that Iran has never invaded another country in the last 200 years. When they say death to the United States, it doesn't mean death to, they don't mean death to the people of the United States or even to the officials of the United States. They mean death to crimes, death to killing and carnage, death to supporting killing others, death to insecurity and instability. This is, have you ever heard that an Iranian killing an American? Have you ever heard that? Or a terrorist that was Iranian and he carried out a terrorist attack against the Americans? No, it was your president who confessed that the Americans created the ISIS in our region, and they were responsible for this wrong image that is portrayed of religion or the Muslims in the world. And once again, I would like to tell you and remind you that this is not death to the American people or to the officials, death to crimes and atrocities, to bullying, to the use of force, and anybody who would like to become an accomplice in the crimes perpetrated by others.
Do you believe that? That's the stupidest thing I think I've heard this week. Death to America. It doesn't really mean death to America. No, baba. It doesn't mean a death to America. It means a death to the killing. Death to the killing. Very Iranian. I love it. It sounds just like my dad, although my dad wouldn't say something that's stupid. Look, the Iranians have got themselves in a spin on this because in 1979, you have the US hostage crisis, a bunch of students kidnapped basically 50 American nationals. And ever since then, for a big chunk of US civil society, and particularly its political class, that's how they regard Iran. He said, when was the last time there have been Iranian terrorists? The Iranian hostage crisis. Right? In recent years, 100%. That point about not invading a foreign country for 200 years, broadly true. Broadly true. The idea of a sovereign Iran making a declaration of war against another country, true. Yes. Okay? Yes, the Shah was kind of friendly with the Third Reich. Yes, they've funded proxies in the region in terms of trying to maximize their perceived national interests, etc. But actual war, a really long time ago. Really long time ago. The last kind of conventional war they were involved in, which they kind of started, was 200 years ago. All true. But they do say death to America, and they don't really mean like death to the killing. It does feel to me that there's a part of the Iranian establishment that wants to build some kind of relationship with America because they're beginning to perceive that Israel is going so far that actually bits of the US recognize it's not in their rational self-interest to back those guys anymore. But it's very hard because your muscle memory over the last 50 years is saying death to America and the US hostage crisis. It's very hard, particularly as a conservative in that country. But paradoxically, I've been to Iran, I'm half Iranian. Those Iranians love Americans. They love the West. They love Germany. On Duolingo, if you look at the region, this is crazy, it's true. The whole of Asia, everybody is learning English as the number one language on Duolingo, except Iran, where they're learning German. Always strange, iconoclastic people, Iranians, I like to say. I found that a really enlightening interview, not least because you got the scoop about the Israelis potentially trying to take out the entire Iranian government. I think that's quite useful news, personally. I think it's quite a useful thing to know. But given recent events in the UK, particularly the proscription of Palestine action, it also raises really interesting questions about media freedom. Britain is not at war with Iran, and there's certainly no support in this country for an Iraq-style war in a country 3 times larger next door. But what would the response be if Novara interviewed the likes of Pezeshkian? That's just one example. More on that in a moment. But first, That same point of media freedom was made by Tucker Carlson himself on X over the weekend, ahead of that interview being published.
We just finished up an interview with Masoud Pezeshkian, who is the president of Iran, the 70-year-old heart surgeon who leads the country we were just at war with about a week and a half ago. We know we'll be criticized for doing this interview. Why did we do it anyway? Well, we did it because we were just at war with Iran 10 days ago and maybe again. And so our view, which has remained consistent over time, is that American citizens have the constitutional right and the God-given right to all the information they can gather about matters that affect them. If their country is doing something with their money in their name, they have a right, an absolute right, to know as much about it as they can. And that would include hearing from the people they're fighting.
He's right. He's right. In the UK right now, we can't even interview someone from Palestine Action because of the 2000 Terrorism Act, let alone the leader of Iran. And by the way, if you think what Tucker Carlson is doing by interviewing the likes of Vladimir Putin and Masoud Pezeshkian is without precedent, it's never happened before, think again. On the eve of the first Gulf War, Pete Arnett interviewed Saddam Hussein for CNN. That was a channel started by progressive media tycoon Ted Turner. Colin Powell tried to stop that happening, with Turner being accused of appeasement of Saddam Hussein, giving him a platform, being a patsy, a puppet for a foreign leader. We've heard that a fair few times over the years, haven't we? So you see, none of this is new. These questions about interviewing senior foreign figures didn't start with Tucker Carlson. And this is something I want to throw out to our audience. How important do you think it is for these kinds of interview to happen? On a technical level, it's very hard to interview somebody in different languages. Actually, you often don't get much value out of it. But I think the principle of having dialogue with civil society and, yes, politicians in countries like Russia, Venezuela, Iran, China, anywhere, frankly, is of huge importance. For a free, democratic society, you should be trying to listen to as many perspectives from as many people as possible. Marcus, back to the content of that interview. What did you make of the claim that Israel tried to kill Iran's president?
Yeah, well, I mean, to bring it back to what you're saying then, there's obviously untold potential in learning, and there's a deep worth in learning anything. Even if it's propaganda, you learn something from learning, don't you? And there's probably something in that the people who would now feel comfortable interviewing quote-unquote enemies of the West are now these figures like Tucker Carlson, these kind of maverick figures in the American ruling class, rather than maybe 20 years ago when it would have been figures like Robert Fisk or John Pilger, or even Tony Benn flew out to Baghdad to interview Saddam Hussein. I think it's frightening that this kind of dialogue, which for whatever good it does, it is intended that a degree of civil society or political interest from a wing of one country is trying its best to intervene to shape the influence of its own country on another country via dialogue and information. Even if that in the final analysis is not allowed, the idea that it's just stopped by an IDF assassination, for example, is terrifying. I mean, so Mark Seddon, who worked at the United Nations for a very long time, but before that, he was the editor of Tribune, actually, and he was on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, representing the party's left wing. It's in the former Labour MP Chris Mullin's diary somewhere, although I can't remember which one, about, I think in the last NEC meeting prior to the Iraq War, Seddon had just come back from interviewing, that close to the invasion of Iraq. He'd just come back for interviewing Saddam Hussein's Deputy Prime Minister, Tariq Aziz. And he had a message, which was that, he'd met all of the British Prime Ministers from Edward Heath onwards, but he'd never met Blair. And he gave Seddon a written instruction, tell Tony Blair, we have no weapons of mass destruction, and tell him that he's welcome to come to Baghdad and see for himself. And there's a line in it where he says, I can't really remember what Tony Blair's reaction was, other than he was just purely incredulous. And, these things happened so recently. There was a wider consideration for debate and civil society and the democratic considerations than now.
Yeah, it's really an important point, right? I mean, your publication, Tribune, I think it was Barbara Castle writing for Tribune, am I right, Marcus? She was one of the people really highlighting what was going on in Kenya in the final years of British colonialism there, British occupation. And I feel almost like in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s for sure, this country was in a much better place with regards to critique of foreign policy. What do you make of that? Do you think it's gotten worse? Because of course we're talking about 2003, though. That's 20 years ago. Do you think it's worse today than it was in 2003? Do you think the direction of travel is to somewhere where more and more censorship, yes, and less rather capacity for self-critique, self-reflection on foreign policy? Which way do you think the wind is going?
Well, I never think it's been perfect. I mean, since 1945, there's always been a time and a place where the British state steps in to defend its imperial interests. I mean, one of the strongest examples I can just immediately comes to mind was a journalist called Alan Winnington, who wrote some of the first major anthropological texts in the early 60s about China. Real groundbreaking anthropologist. But he was only in China because he lost his British citizenship for reporting that in the Daily Worker at the time, it's now the Morning Star, he reported that British soldiers had been beheading Malaysian guerrillas for fun, people fighting for their independence and their rights from the British state. He got his citizenship taken off him and was called a traitor for reporting that. And so it's never been perfect. And you look, time and time again as the British media and its lies in the 6 counties of Ireland. So it's never been 100%. It's never been particularly decent or pluralistic, but it's certainly wider, and there was certainly much more room for manoeuvre for progressive people and supporters of human rights than I say there would be now.
Yeah, I think we're moving in a very strange direction. I mean, I think that's right. I think doing something like that today probably very hard. But I think the broader culture, I think it's definitely in reverse, right? I think the heyday, 70s, maybe even the 80s, with regards to people like you say, John Pilger, Robert Fisk, I feel like we're moving away from that now. I mean, there's obviously a great deal of journalism done on this stuff, but I'm talking about the broader culture. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, look, Tucker Carlson, he might be a deep state asset for the CIA. I have no idea. His father was CIA, of course. But Tucker Carlson is conducting these interviews, I suppose. But I do hate this pernicious culture where people tell you with power what to think and who to like. And look, Tucker Carlson has been a grifter in the past. He's lied about a ton of things. I want people in the chat and watching and listening to this to know I don't think Tucker Carlson all of a sudden is, give this guy a Pulitzer. But he did say something I really liked, which is you don't get to tell me who I like. You don't get to tell me who I trust. You don't get to do that. I'm a free person. That is what enlightenment is meant to be. Read What is Enlightenment by Immanuel Kant. Das ist Aufklärung. Read it. It basically says that. Enlightenment is the capacity to make up your mind without the imposition of the prejudices and perspectives of other people. Thinking for yourself. Dare to think for yourself. We're in a funny spot in the West if Tucker Carlson, of all people, is the embodiment of enlightenment values in the media. I'd like to think Novara Media is as well. I'd like to think Tribune is as well, with Marcus dropping some very, very, very important knowledge there. If you like our work here in Novara Media and you want to be part of building a new media for different politics, you know what to do. Go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. We are marching. You, me, all of us. The Novara army is marching to 1 million YouTube subscribers. If you're watching and you've not already subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? Get us over the line. We need 4,000 more of you to make us a 1 million subscriber channel. If you've already done that and you don't support us, why not do that as well? The Jeffrey Epstein files seem to have vanished. The files refer to a client list allegedly held by disgraced paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein, who died in a New York prison cell in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. It has been repeatedly suggested that Epstein's death was not a suicide and that he was murdered to prevent him from implicating an elite circle of government officials, celebrities, and business leaders who were involved in his crimes. Now, the US Department of Justice and FBI have dropped their probe into the deceased sex offender and released a memo which concludes Epstein's death was a suicide. The joint memo also says this. This systematic review revealed no incriminating, quote, client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. And yet, in February, Attorney General Pam Bondi said something rather different.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump.
It's on my desk. Now, it never existed. Here's Donald Trump speaking to Lex Friedman, the podcaster, in the run-up to the 2024 election.
The list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Probably will be, by the way. Probably.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it. Now, Kennedy's interesting because it's so many years ago. You know, they do that for danger, too, because, you know, it endangers certain people, et cetera, et cetera. So Kennedy is very different from the Epstein thing. But yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
So what's changed? Well, perhaps we can look to Trump's public breakup with his former head of Doge, Elon Musk. After the world's richest man and the president of the United States had a very public falling out over Trump's big, beautiful bill, Musk went on to post this. Time to drop the really big bomb. @Real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they've not been made public. That's from last month. Have a nice day, DJT rather, Donald J. Trump. That post has now been deleted. The wealthiest man in the world had to delete the post. Maybe it was a bit too close to the bone. But Musk shared a meme yesterday mocking the Trump administration. You can see here, effectively, for people who are listening on podcasts, it's the clown meme. We will release the Epstein list as the first one, and then you get to the end, the guy's looking like a clown. There is no Epstein list. I think it's a pretty accurate summation of what's happened. And Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire weighed in on Good Morning Britain this morning.
We can see when Mohammed Fayed at Harrods, he had a network of people who were helping him to get those women he was raping, whether it was security or other staff. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just do this on their own.
No.
Now, yeah, okay, she's in prison, he's dead, but there'll be a lot of people around them who were working with them. And now, today, there'll be hundreds possibly of very powerful, influential, rich men who will be breathing a huge sigh of relief.
I don't think it's helpful to compare Mohammed Al-Fayed, previously the owner of Harrods Fulham Football Club, to Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was the world's most famous paedophile. He was friends with the likes of Bill Gates, at one time the world's wealthiest person, former heads of state, or at that time heads of state, people like Peter Mandelson, all kinds of people, the billionaire financier, friends, the rich and famous, Prince Andrew, okay? Some very powerful people. His partner in crime literally was Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell was literally the daughter of Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was the spy for Israel, allegedly. Great book on it. The month after Seymour Hersh writes a book about the Israeli nuclear program, the month after, I think in 1991, the month after, Robert Maxwell dies in a freak boating accident, mysteriously dies, okay? His daughter is then friends with this financier, billionaire. How do you make the billions? Nobody really knows. He just had billions. Where did the money come from? We don't know. And he somehow has a private island and all these wealthy, powerful people go there. And there's loads of parties with women and kids and all sorts. And he's into that stuff himself. And he's caught multiple times. He dies in prison, but don't worry, it's suicide. And then you have years of people saying they'll publish all the details about this stuff, and then all of a sudden, the kibosh on it. A month after, the president of the United States is called out on X by the world's wealthiest person in a tweet saying that he's on the list, and that tweet is then deleted. Seems kind of bad. I don't think you can compare it to Mohammed Al-Fayed. Very serious crime, sexual assault, harassment, sexual abuse, awful. Prison, 100%. I think we're talking about a systemic political, cultural scandal which has ramifications on multiple continents in commerce, politics, and high society. Now, speaking of people accused of sexual abuse, the DOJ has now dropped investigations into Epstein's clients less than a week after rapper Sean Combs, better known as Diddy, or to people my age, Puff Daddy, was acquitted on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. Combs was found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution, and he remains in detention while he awaits sentencing. The rap mogul's high-profile trial included graphic testimony from two of Combs' former girlfriends. One, Cassie Ventura, testified about being controlled by Combs due to the threat and presence of violence in their relationship. Violence which can be seen in a 2016 CCTV video that shows Combs beating and kicking Ventura in a hotel hallway. We're not going to show you that footage. Some of you will have seen it. You can see it if you so wish. We aren't going to show it. What is going on? Or what is going on? At the heart of the Trump sort of political offer were conspiracy theories, pseudo-conspiracy theories, and actually some of those conspiracy theories bordered on the truth, like the Epstein files. At the heart of all that was the idea that the powerful were completely out of control and that there was no accountability for people if they were powerful enough, people like Jeffrey Epstein. And lo and behold, Pam Bondi and Donald Trump have shown that's absolutely 100% true. They've really undermined a core plank of Trumpism. I mean, we haven't got it to show you, but basically, Alex Jones was crying. You know, he's sort of miserable about it all. Just goes to show that the insurgent political offer always sounds so much more radical when they're out of power. When they're in power, I'm on the list, forget about it. Is that the last we've heard of the Epstein files, though? I wonder. The ambassador of this country to the United States was very close friends to the world's most famous paedophile. And our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, had absolutely no issue with giving him that role. You know what? They do have impunity. They do have impunity. And I'm not suggesting that Mandelson did anything illegal, but if you're friends with the world's most famous paedophile and you carry on that friendship to the extent that you go see them after they've been charged, you probably shouldn't be representing this country. On that note, thanks to everyone for tuning in this evening. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.